The storm had no mercy that night. Rain hammered the forest floor like punishment, bending the old pines sideways, turning the dirt paths of Silverstone territory into rivers of mud. Most wolves had retreated indoors hours ago, curled beside fires, pressed against warm bodies, safe inside the pack's boundaries. No one walked the outer woods after dark during a storm. That was rule number 1. Lena had never been good at following rules. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and kept walking, a lantern swinging in her right hand, its flame fighting the wind with everything it had. She was not supposed to be out here. She had finished her shift at the pack kitchen 3 hours ago, scrubbing pots, restocking shelves, doing the work no one else wanted because no one else was asked. Omega work, invisible work, the kind that kept the pack running, and earned its doer exactly 0 acknowledgement. She was heading back to her small cabin at the edge of Packland when she heard it. Not thunder, not wind, a cry, small, weak, somewhere beneath the sound of the storm, underneath everything. A sound so fragile it should not have survived the noise around it. But Lena heard it. She had always been better at listening than most. She stopped walking. The cry came again, slightly to her left, off the main path, deep into the brush where the old oak roots tangled above the ground like broken fingers. She hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stepped off the path. She found him beneath the largest root cluster, half submerged in muddy water, shaking so violently his whole tiny body seemed to vibrate. A wolf pup, newborn or close to it, eyes still filmed with the haze of the very young, formatted flat against fragile ribs she could count from a foot away. No mother, no scent trail, nothing but this small creature, alone in the dark, fighting to stay alive with everything his tiny body had left. Lena did not think. She crouched, scooped him against her chest, tucked him beneath her jacket against her heartbeat, and walked home. She told no one. She knew better than that. Silverstone pack law was carved clearly into every member's memory from the age of 5. No stray wolves, no outside animals, no exceptions. It was a border law, a protection law, or so the alpha always said. In practice, it meant the pack kept itself closed, suspicious, and small. Outsiders were threats. Strays were threats. Even a pup with no teeth and no open eyes, apparently, was a threat. So she kept him hidden in a box beneath her cot, lined with her spare shirt, warmed with a clay pot she filled with heated stones every few hours through the night. She fed him goat milk from the kitchen stores, telling herself she would return it. She learned quickly that he was hungry every 2 hours. She learned that he made a sound like a small exhale, almost a sigh, when he was content. She learned that despite everything, despite his size and his weakness and the odds stacked entirely against him, he was stubborn. She liked that about him. 3 days passed, then 5. He grew stronger slowly, the way things do when they have decided to survive despite circumstances. His eyes began to open, pale at first, then sharpening into something clearer. He started to lift his head when she entered the room. He started to know her. On the 7th morning, Beta Harkon came to her cabin. He said he was doing a routine check. He said it with the smile he always wore, the one that never reached his eyes, the one that made the air around him feel slightly colder. Lena stood in the doorway and told him everything was fine. He nodded pleasantly and asked if he could come inside. She had no legal right to refuse a beta. He found the pup in under 2 minutes. He did not even have to look hard. The next hour was a blur. She would spend years trying to forget. Word spread to the pack the way bad news always does. Faster than fire, louder than it needed to be. Pack members gathered outside her cabin in the rain, faces arranged into expressions of scandal and satisfaction. The alpha arrived. Harkon spoke at length. Lena was given approximately 4 minutes to defend herself. No one spoke for her. She had known they wouldn't. The verdict was delivered before the mud had even dried on Harkin's boots. Exile, effective immediately, permanent. She would be marked with a shame rune, a burned sigil pressed behind the left ear, the pack's way of ensuring no other pack would take her in easily. She would leave with what she could carry. She would not return. She was given 10 minutes to pack. Lena stood at the tree line 40 minutes later, a small bag on her back, rain still falling, the shame rune still raw and stinging behind her ear. The entire pack had assembled to watch. That was tradition. Exile required witnesses. It was meant to be humiliating. It succeeded. She looked at their faces one last time. The Alpha, who would not meet her eyes. Harkon, who smiled with his whole face this time. The kitchen women she had worked beside for 6 years, looking at the ground. Then she looked down at the bundle pressed against her chest. The pup looked back at her with those pale, serious eyes. His small nose worked at the air. He made the small exhale sound, the contented one. Lena adjusted her grip, turned her back on Silverstone pack, and walked into the dark. She had been given 10 minutes to pack. She had used 2 of them on her belongings. She had used the other 8, making sure the pup was warm. The forest did not care that she had nowhere to go. It simply existed around her, indifferent, vast, older than any pack law or alpha verdict. The trees did not know she had been exiled. The river did not know she carried a shame rune behind her ear. The moss growing thick over the rocks did not know she had nothing left. The wilderness received her the way it receives everything, without judgment, without warmth, without cruelty. Lena decided that was enough. She walked through the first night without stopping, putting distance between herself and Silverstone territory, keeping the pup tucked against her chest where her body heat could reach him. He slept through most of it, occasionally stirring, occasionally making the small exhale sound that had already become the most reassuring noise she knew. As long as she heard that sound, everything was manageable. By dawn, she had found what she needed, a natural rock shelf jutting from a hillside, deep enough to block wind from 2 directions, hidden enough that casual eyes would pass over it. She had grown up in these outer woods in small ways, running errands to border markers, collecting herbs for the kitchen. She knew how to read the land, even if the land had never formally been introduced to her. She built a shelter the way necessity teaches. Imperfectly at first, then better. She named him Ash on the 3rd day. She had been calling him Pup and Little One and once, during a particularly exhausting 2 a.m. feeding, "You absolute tiny tyrant." But none of those were names. He needed a name. She looked at him in the gray morning light, his fur the color of wood smoke, his eyes catching the pale sky, and the word arrived without effort. Ash! He responded to it immediately, which she told herself meant nothing. Pups responded to tone, not words. But he turned his head when she said it. He focused on her face with an attention that seemed too deliberate for something his age. She said it again, just to test a theory. He made the exhale sound. She laughed for the first time since the exile. It came out rough and unpracticed, like something that had been sitting and used in a drawer. But it came. By the 2nd week, she had a routine. She woke before dawn, checked Ash fed him, then moved through a mental checklist. Fire, water, food, shelter, integrity. The rhythm of survival was relentless, but honest. It asked for effort and returned results. There were no politics in it, no hierarchy, no beta with cold eyes and a pleasant smile deciding her worth. She found she slept better in the wilderness than she ever had in her cabin at the edge of Silverstone land. But Ash was beginning to unsettle her in ways she could not explain. He was growing too fast. Not alarmingly, not in the way that suggested sickness. In the opposite way, the way that suggested something extraordinary happening beneath ordinary-looking fur. By the end of the 1st week, he was the size a pup should be at 3 weeks. By the end of the 2nd week, he moved with a coordination that should have taken a month to develop. Scrapes healed overnight. Scratches vanished by morning. Once, he tumbled hard from the rock shelf edge, a fall that made Lena's heart seize, and landed, shook himself, and trotted back toward her without so much as a whimper. His eyes, when the light caught them at certain angles, shifted gold, not amber, not the warm brown of a common wolf. Gold, deep and liquid, and ancient, the color of something that did not belong to ordinary bloodlines. Lena knew enough about pack genetics to know that color meant something significant. She just did not know exactly what. On the 14th night, she woke to silence. Not peaceful silence, the wrong kind. The forest had gone still in the specific way it goes still when something large and powerful is close. Every small creature had stopped moving. The wind had paused. Even the river seemed to quiet itself as though listening. Ash was awake beside her, sitting perfectly upright, staring into the dark beyond the tree line. not frightened, attentive, his small ears forward, his gold-shifted eyes steady and calm, as though whatever was out there was not a threat, but something recognized, something familiar. Lena rose slowly, her wolf instincts pushing forward even in her human skin. She could feel the presence before she could see it. A pressure in the air, a weight that had nothing to do with the physical world. Whoever was out there carried authority, the way storms carry electricity. Invisible until it wasn't. Then the trees moved. He stepped into the edge of the firelight, massive, dark-furred in his wolf form, a size that belonged to bloodlines bred over centuries for exactly this kind of power. He stopped at the boundary of the light and simply stood there, looking at her, looking at Ash. Then he shifted. It was the smoothest shift she had ever witnessed. No visible struggle, no sound, just one form releasing into another with the ease of someone removing a coat. The man who stood in the wolf's place was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that somehow remained unaffected by the wilderness around him. His jaw was set. His eyes were gold, the same gold as Ash's. He stared at the pup in Lena's arms for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something enormous held under rigid control, the way a river holds against a dam. His voice, when it came, was low and fractured at its edges despite every obvious effort to keep it steady. "That is my son." The fire crackled between them. Ash made the exhale sound, the contented one, and reached one small paw toward the man's voice. Lena held him tighter and did not move. Nobody moved for a long moment. The fire sat between them like a small, nervous witness, flickering in the silence, throwing unsteady light across the man's face, across Lena's, across the pup pressed against her chest. Ash had stopped reaching toward the stranger's voice. He had settled back into Lena's arms with that unnerving calm of his, gold eyes moving between the two of them as though following a conversation only he could hear. Lena's voice arrived before her courage did. "Prove it." The man looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, not the cold authority she expected from someone who had just announced ownership of the child in her arms. Something closer to surprise, as though people did not often ask him to prove things. "My name is Caden." He said it quietly, the way people say things that require no amplification. "Alpha King of the Westbourne throne. My son was taken from the royal pack 3 months ago during a coordinated night attack. His mother," a pause, brief, controlled. "His mother did not survive it. We found blood. We found the nursery destroyed. We did not find him." His eyes moved to Ash again and stayed there. "I have been looking for him every day since." Lena listened to all of it without interrupting. He told her about the attack, swift, organized, clearly planned by someone with inside knowledge of the royal pack's layout. He told her about the weeks of searching, the false trails, the silence that followed. He told her about the grief that a king was not permitted to show publicly, that had to be folded away and locked somewhere functional so that the search could continue. He told her all of it standing at the edge of her firelight, making no move to advance, no demand for her to hand Ash over immediately. That restraint told her more than his words did. She looked at Ash, then back at Caden. "He was alone in the forest," she said. "Silverstone territory, eastern border, near the old oak root cluster by the river bend. I found him during a storm. He was already in bad condition. He would not have survived another few hours in that water." Something tightened in Caden's jaw. Silverstone Pack. He repeated the name slowly, the way you repeat something you want to remember precisely. "How far is Silverstone territory from where you found him?" "Directly adjacent." Lena paused. "The beta does regular border checks on that stretch of forest. He would have found Ash days before I did if he had been looking." The silence that followed was a different quality than the ones before it. The pieces arrived in her mind in the wrong order at first, the way puzzle edges do before the image becomes clear. Harkin's border checks. The specific location where Ash had been abandoned. Not deep wilderness, not enemy territory, but the exact border stretch that Harkon personally patrolled. The exile arriving so swiftly after discovery. The verdict delivered before she had finished speaking. The shame rune pressed behind her ear with an efficiency that suggested someone wanted her gone before she could think too carefully about what she had found. She had not been exiled for breaking pack law. She had been exiled for finding something someone needed to stay hidden. She said aloud slowly, watching Caden's face as the same conclusion visibly arrived behind his eyes, harder and colder than hers, carrying the full weight of a king's fury held on a very short leash. "You're beta." He said it like a verdict. He was paid. Rival pack. Most likely. Someone who understood that removing my heir during a period of royal grief would create a succession gap they could exploit. His eyes moved the trees around them, where Lena now realized his wolves had been positioned the entire time. Watching. Waiting. I need his name. Harkon. The word left her mouth without hesitation. 6 years of invisible work. 6 years of cold smiles and small humiliations, and finally, exile. His name is Harkon. Caden's wolves moved through the confirmation process with thoroughness that suggested they had been doing this for 3 months and had become very good at it. They checked Lena's account against territorial maps, against patrol records, against intelligence gathered from 6 other packs. Every detail aligned, every timeline matched. The picture that assembled itself was clean and damning. Lena had not stolen the royal heir. She had unknowingly rescued him from precise location where Harkon had abandoned him, left in the storm, in the mud, in the cold, to die quietly and be discovered weeks later as a tragedy rather than a crime. One of Caden's wolves said something quietly in his ear. Caden closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, the fury was still there, but it had settled into something colder and more deliberate, the kind of anger that does not shout, the kind that plans. He looked at Lena. "You were exiled for saving my son's life." He said it simply, but the weight behind it was not simple at all. You lost everything. Your pack, your home, your standing, because you found him before Harkon could ensure he was never found at all. Lena said nothing. There was nothing to add. "I am offering you a place in the royal pack." He held her gaze steadily. "Protection, standing, a home, not as compensation. I am aware that what you lost cannot be simply replaced. But because you have earned it in full and because—" He paused, something briefly unguarded crossing his face. "Because my son knows your heartbeat better than he knows mine." Lena looked down at Ash. He was watching her with those ancient gold eyes, one paw resting against her collarbone, his breathing slow and even. The exhale sound came softly, unprompted. She wanted to say yes immediately, and distrusted that wanting entirely. She had trusted a pack before. She had given 6 years of invisible labor to people who had handed her an exile verdict in 4 minutes without blinking. "I need time," she said. Caden nodded once. "You have until morning." Then Ash did something that removed the decision from her hands entirely. He turned from Lena's face to Caden's, then back to Lena's, then lifted his small head, and in a voice barely larger than a breath, uncertain and new and impossibly clear, said, "Mama." The word landed in the clearing like something thrown from a great height. Lena's breath stopped. Caden went very still. Ash settled back against her chest with the serene indifference of someone who had simply stated a fact and saw no reason to elaborate further. The fire crackled. The forest breathed. Somewhere in the trees, one of Caden's wolves made a sound that might, in different circumstances, have been a laugh quickly converted into a cough. Caden looked at his son, then at Lena. Something moved through his expression. Quiet, unguarded, there and gone in the space of a breath. "Until morning," he repeated softly, but his eyes said something else entirely. Morning came soft and unhurried. Lena had not slept. She had sat beside the fire with Ash curled warm against her side, watching the darkness thin at its edges, turning the word over in her mind the way you turn a stone, examining every surface, testing its weight. "Mama." One word from a mouth that had barely learned to form sounds. One word that had somehow carried more authority than any verdict delivered by any alpha she had ever stood before. She gave Caden her answer when the first light broke through the trees. "Yes," she said simply, "but I want to be there when you go to Silverstone." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "I would not have it any other way." They reached Silverstone Pack territory by mid-morning. Caden traveled with 12 wolves, not an army, not a show of excess force, but 12 wolves who moved with the quiet precision of people who had never needed numbers to communicate danger. Lena walked beside him, Ash against her chest, the shame rune behind her ear still faintly raw. She had considered covering it. She decided against it. She wanted them to see it. She wanted them to look at what they had done in the full light of what it had cost them. The pack assembled quickly when word of the royal party reached the main grounds. That was instinct. When an alpha king arrives unannounced, you gather, you stand straight. You arrange your face into whatever expression communicates cooperation most convincingly. Lena watched them arrange themselves and felt nothing she had expected to feel. No fear, no residual longing for the place she had once called home. Only a clean, clear calm, the kind that comes when you have already lost everything once and survived it. Harkon saw her first. His face moved through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on something carefully neutral. His eyes dropped to ash, then rose to Caden's face, and whatever he read there dismantled the neutral expression entirely. Caden did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply spoke, and the weight behind each word made volume unnecessary. Beta Harkon of Silverstone Pack. He let the name sit in the air for a moment. 3 months ago, you were paid to dispose of my son. You left a newborn heir in floodwater during a storm on your eastern border, expecting the wilderness to finish what your employer started. Another pause. An Omega woman from your own pack found him, saved him, brought him to safety at the cost of everything she owned in this world. His eyes moved briefly to Lena, then back. You then exiled her for it. The silence across the pack grounds was absolute. Harkin's composure collapsed in pieces. First the shoulders, then the jaw, then the eyes. He looked once at the pack alpha as though searching for support, found none, and looked at the ground instead. He started. Paid, Caden said simply. Yes, we know. By whom, and for how much, you'll discuss at length with my council. He nodded once to the wolves behind him. 2 stepped forward. Harkon did not resist. There was nothing left in him to resist with. The pack alpha, a broad man who had always looked more comfortable behind authority than beneath it, stepped forward with his palms open, the universal gesture of a man trying to negotiate his way out of consequences. Caden regarded him with the particular patience of someone who had already decided the outcome. You permitted this verdict, Caden said. You signed the exile order. You pressed a shame rune onto a woman who had committed no crime beyond mercy. He tilted his head slightly. Your rank is stripped, effective now. Your pack will be placed under royal oversight until new leadership is properly established. The man opened his mouth, closed it, stepped back. Then Caden turned to Lena. He reached into his coat and produced a small vial, clear, containing a pale liquid that caught the light. Rune solvent, rare, expensive, kept in royal stores for exactly this kind of correction. He stepped toward her, paused. May I? The question, asked quietly, for her alone, landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. She nodded. He applied the solvent behind her left ear with careful hands. The shame rune dissolved in seconds, taking its sting with it, leaving nothing behind but clean skin and the faint warmth of his fingertips. He stepped back and turned to face the assembled pack. Every face, every witness. This woman's name is Lena. His voice carried across every corner of the grounds without effort. She entered your territory as an Omega. She leaves it under royal protection, as the honored guardian of the Westborn heir. A beat. Remember her name differently than you have. Lena stood straight and let them look. The royal pack received her like weather, simply, without ceremony, adjusting around her presence as though it had always been accounted for. She was given quarters near the royal nursery, warm and generous, and nothing like the cabin at the edge of Silverstone land. She was given a title she did not know what to do with. She was given, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, the sensation of being somewhere she was not required to make herself small. Ash thrived. He grew with that extraordinary speed of his, filling the royal nursery with noise and motion, charming every wolf in the pack with the serene confidence of someone who had inherited authority at a genetic level and had not yet learned to be modest about it. He still made the exhale sound when he was content. He still reached for Lena first when something startled him. He still called her Mama. No one corrected him. Caden was not an easy man to know. He was quiet in a way that deep water is quiet, still on the surface, significant underneath. He carried his grief for his lost mate with the dignity of someone who understood that mourning had no timeline and required no audience. He did not pretend it was finished. He did not use it as a wall. He began appearing in the nursery doorway in the evenings, not entering, simply checking. On the fourth evening, Lena looked up from where she sat beside Ash's sleeping form and said, without planning to, "You can come in. It is your nursery." He came in. He sat in the chair across from hers. They did not speak for a long time, which should have been uncomfortable and was not. This became quietly a pattern. They talked about small things first. Ash's development, his remarkable healing, the gold in his eyes that Caden confirmed came from a bloodline older than any current pack structure. Then larger things. Her years in Silverstone, the invisible labor of an Omega life. His years carrying a crown that had been placed on him young, before he had finished becoming the person who would eventually wear it well. They were careful with each other in the way people are careful when they have both been broken by something and are not yet certain how solid the repairs are. 3 weeks after her arrival, Lena was sitting in the nursery watching Ash sleep when Caden appeared in the doorway at his usual hour. He crossed the room, stood beside her chair, and looked down at his son, small and fierce and perfect, chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep, safe sleep. He chose well, Caden said quietly. Lena looked up at him. He was already looking at her. So did I, he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise. It was something quieter and more durable than either, the kind of statement that does not require an answer, because it is not asking question. It is simply placing something true in the space between two people and letting it exist there. Lena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at Ash, and the small smile that found her face was a kind that does not announce itself. Outside, the night was warm. The royal pack moved through its quiet routines beyond the nursery walls. Fires lit, voices low, the steady pulse of home that had learned after loss to hold its people more carefully. Ash slept on, dreaming whatever extraordinary things extraordinary heirs dream about. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, Lena did not feel like the edge of something. She felt like the center.